Hello and welcome to this introduction to the Renaissance. The Renaissance is really the first topic that we're going to explore in this course about European history. Now, the Renaissance, we're going to refer to it more as a movement than an actual time period. So let's think about the Renaissance as a movement of change, as a movement of rebirth, of something new, of cultural changes, political changes, economic, and many other different ways of understanding the world and obviously addressing issues in culture, in society, and in nature even. So let's delve into it. Now, in order to start, I would like to point your attention to our primary source document, which is one of your assigned readings for this week. And that is the reading from Petrarch. Now, Petrarch, Francesco Petrarch, was a poet from the 14th century. He was well known for presenting or proposing the idea of creating a new type of education, an education in Europe that would emphasize the study of the classics, as in Roman authors and Greek authors as well, Roman art, Greek art, and so forth, in order to learn from them so they could rebuild European society and take it to its greatest possible height. But according to Petrarch, everything started with education. Now, in his famous letter to Livy, the historian from the Roman age, he highlights the importance of the ways of the past and the Roman era. He highlighted the importance of the values and the perspectives and the way to understand the world that took place in the Roman era. So let's get into it. Now, the Renaissance is, like I said, an era of rebirth. The French, this word comes from the French, which means rebirth. Renaissance literally means rebirth. And it's used to describe the rebirth of the culture of classical antiquity in Italy, right? Like I said, the primary source reading assigned is Petrarch's letter to Livy. Now, the glory of the classical past was reborn after centuries of darkness, right? In the Middle Ages, there were certain things that, particularly in terms of politics and society, that needed to improve, and this was pretty well known. So ideas were very common about how to improve in terms of politics and social structure. Now, like I said, the Renaissance was a movement, not a time period. The Renaissance had cultural, political, and religious outcomes in Europe in the long term. And some historians have seen the Renaissance as the movement that ushered Europe into modernity. So you have the Middle Ages on one side, you have modernity on the other side, and right in between, bridging that gap, bridging or making that connection, is the age of the Renaissance, the age of rebirth. Now, what really brought this new age of rebirth was the wealth and prosperity in Italy. Major developments during the era of the Renaissance rested on the economic growth of the Italian city-states. Now, remember, Italy during this time period is really not a country as we know it today. The Italian peninsula was split into multiple different Italian states, and each of these Italian city-states were their own political unit. So the northern Italian city-states, such as Genoa, Milan, and Florence, had experienced a commercial revival, especially during the 11th century. So there were finances flowing, there were multiple businesses, the economy was vibrant, trade was going on, so there was a lot happening in Renaissance, in the years leading up to the Renaissance in Italy. Now, merchants were not only very wealthy, but also had gained political power. They used money and power to buy luxuries and hire talent in a system of patronage. Now, patronage is one of the important concepts that you want to keep in mind as you study the Renaissance, because patronage, and let me define it for you: financial support of writers and artists by cities, groups, individuals, and to often produce very special works. Art was seen as a symbol of status in Renaissance Italy. So it was very common for these wealthy families to provide financial support to artists, architects also, to get them to create very special things. And then they would finance it, they would pay the artists or the architects or the authors to build these amazing works of art, or create these amazing works of art. And then they would use this as a symbol of status. So patronage, financial support of art, was very, very common in Renaissance Italy, and actually very, very significant amounts of money were utilized to move this forward. Now, in the Italian city-states, let's say in 1494, northern Italian city-states led the way in the commercial revival. So we have places like Florence, who was a commercial leader and the birthplace of the Renaissance. So you see the connection there between Florence and economic power, and also being the birthplace of the Renaissance. So most of these, as you look at the history of the world, and particularly the history of Europe in this case, you begin to see that the places that are known for financial growth, financial stability, financial expansion, however you want to call it, tend to be hubs for other areas to develop, whether it's science or art or many other different things. So in this case, in the case of the Renaissance, we're going to look particularly at Florence. Florence was the commercial leader of the era, and it was also the birthplace of the Renaissance. Now, so Florence led the way. Yes, it was located on fertile soil by the Arno River. It was a commercial leader. Now, the location right next to the river facilitates trade, right? It was also located in the main road northward of Rome, which facilitated the movement of goods from one place to another. It was, a city that grew rich, buying and selling grain, cloth, wool, weapons, armor, spices, glass, and wine throughout Europe and the Mediterranean. So Florentine merchants loaned and invested money as well. So banking was a big part of the wealth that came into Florence, right? The Florentine mercantile families began to dominate European banking, setting up offices in major European and North African cities. And as I am going through this, it's important that you guys remember the Medici family. The Medici family was a very, very powerful family in Italy during this time period. I would encourage you to go into and look into the history of the Medici family in Renaissance Italy. It's going to open your eyes to many things that happened in politics, in connection to wealth, in connection to cultural, social, political, scientific, trade, and all of these aspects of life. The connections between financial prosperity and power are very, very important. We see that in America today, the influence of powerful entrepreneurs in many aspects of our lives, including social media and technology, finances, trade, and many other things. That tells you that not much has changed. Human beings, we tend to behave in predictable ways. And as we study history, we learn how to really understand the human experience. So Let's move forward. So Florence led the way. By the early 14th century, the economic foundations of Florence were so strong that even crisis could not destroy the city. During the Black Death, Florence suffered, big time. It lost more than half of its population. The plague shook the economy, but it didn't bring it down. It didn't destroy it. Prosperity in Florence, as well as in other Italian states, allowed many people the possibility of buying great material pleasures and a comfortable life. So merchants and bankers commissioned public and private buildings from architects and hired sculptors and painters to decorate their homes and churches. And I'm sure you're familiar with many of the works of art that came from this time period. Now, here's an important primary source. Now, I want to emphasize the role of primary sources in the study of history. Primary sources are first-hand accounts of the events, right? So reading a primary source is like looking through a window of time that allows us to see the past through the eyes of those who were actually there. So the highest form of history is not a documentary, is not a lecture, is not a textbook, is not a website, is not a blog. The highest form of history is primary sources. That's how we really understand and connect with the past. So the primary source here that we want to look at is Benedetto Dei. Benedetto Dei was a merchant and historian from Florence in the 14th century. He writes, "Our beautiful Florence contains within the city in this present year 270 shops belonging to the Wool Merchants Guild, 83 rich and splendid warehouses of the Silk Merchants Guild. The number of banks amounts to 33, the shops of the cabinet makers, whose business is carving and inlaid work, to 84, and there are 44 goldsmiths and jewelers' shops." This is Benedetto Dei, his observation, he's writing exactly what he's seeing in Florence in the 14th century. And it is eye-opening to see how many things we can get from these few words. Number one, he's describing Florence as beautiful. He's also saying that within the city, there's about 270 shops, right, that belong to the Wool Merchants Guild. So that gives you an idea that guilds were very common during this time period. Also that wool was a big part of the economy in those days, particularly in Florence. 83 rich and splendid warehouses of the Silk Merchants Guild. Now, silk traditionally was brought from Asia. So that tells you that there was active trade with Asia. Also, if you have 83 rich and splendid warehouses, it means that there was an overflow. There was an abundant flow of silk coming from Asia into northern Italy, right? Also, it says the number of banks amounts to 33. There were banks in this city, 33 banks, right? People taking loans, people borrowing money, people depositing, all these different things that were going on. It presents the idea, this primary source presents the idea of a very, very vibrant economy, very active financial system, right? Finally, it says the shops of the cabinet makers, whose business is carving and inlaid work, so carving and inlaid work, to 84. There were also goldsmiths. And one thing that I want to point out, he says that there were jewelers' shops. Jewelry, again, jewelry is something that is usually purchased in the context of luxury, in the context of abundance. So this primary source helps us understand really what was going on in Florence during the 14th century at the time of the events through the eyes of someone who actually lived there. So the description then is a description of someone that is impressed by the wealth and growth and prosperity of this town. And like I said before, we are entering our discussion about the Renaissance, the rebirth. And yes, it refers to a rebirth of the classics, changes in education, a big developments in art and culture and architecture, and that was all due to patronage. But it's also a time where the Italian city-states were thriving on a very active economy. All right, so that particular system, economic system, laid the groundwork for the new things that are going to happen, for that rebirth, that political and social and cultural rebirth that we are about to discuss in Renaissance Europe. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to our next discussion. Bye-bye.